From now until the onset of winter, the garden will look marvellous and it'll delight your eye every time you come out in the morning. But we should also think about delighting our noses, because perfume in the garden is a real joy. I reckon you ought to provide one plant that's going to fill your garden with perfume every month of the year. And this month, this is it. This is a viburnum. Now, there are two varieties that are identical. The one that you would normally find in garden centres is Viburnum carlesii. But this one, in fact, is Viburnum juddii. It looks very much the same, but this is a much stronger grower, and also it's resistant to attacks from greenfly. So if you're an organic gardener and you don't want to spread chemicals around, that's ideal. And bear in mind, of course, that if plants are strongly perfumed, then they'll be attracting all sorts of insects like bees and butterflies and things, so you don't want to be killing those. And also, this is going to completely fill your garden with a beautiful scent. Well, this year, I am quite determined that I'm going to produce a succession of vegetables every single day without a break at all. So later on in the programme, I'll be out on the allotment ensuring that I do that. And I've also got a couple of new ideas for making perfect compost. But first of all, there are some plants in the border, like these delphiniums, that must be staked. It's very easy to forget plants at the back of the borders, like delphiniums, and if you do that, that could be disaster. They're quite small at the moment, but they're now going to grow very rapidly. And when they do, the first drop of rain will push them over and break them off, or at least bend those lovely straight stems. So, in my view, each one of these stems ought to be tied individually using soft string. And the one rule really is once round the stem and twice round the cane in order to make sure that the string doesn't slip down the cane. And then you do each one of those shoots in exactly the same way. Shorter plants like the monkshood, aconitum, can be staked with obviously shorter stakes, and if you just put 3 around, you can put a piece of string right the way round the lot. But do bear in mind that canes like this are very dangerous because it's very easy to bend down and put your eye right onto the top of the stake. So it's well worthwhile, in my view, putting on some of these little caps on the top. Yes, they do look a bit obtrusive, I know, but after all, that really is the idea, and it's far better to make sure that you save your eyesight. Clump-forming plants like phlox can be staked with a wire ring. This is simply placed over the top, and within a week or so, the plants will grow right through to completely obscure the ring. These cost round about £4 and will last you literally a lifetime. The flowering cherries have looked marvellous this year, and if you've been taken by them but you've only got a small garden, then a weeping tree could be the answer. This is Prunus yedoensis perpenda, one of the best, I think. But this is a young tree, and you can see that it's fairly narrow. It would look a lot better if it spread a bit more. Well, you can achieve that by pruning it now, just after it's finished flowering. But I wonder if you'll have the courage to do it, because you've got to really butcher it. Look at the wood that has grown this year, and look for an upward-facing bud. And then you cut right back to within about 2 buds, like that. When you've pruned the whole tree, it looks really awful. But within about a year, it will grow out to produce a really spreading, graceful tree.
You know, one thing you really need if you're going to be a gardener is a good sense of humour. The only plant I had in this garden when Jeff handed it to me was this Kanzan cherry. And blow me if the late frost hasn't killed half the blossom. I could spit. But the rest of the garden's beginning to look quite decent, and I'm especially pleased with the way these perennials are beginning to flower. This dicentra's got loads of pink buds to come, and after that there'll be a pool of cool, ferny foliage for the rest of summer. And just look how this first geum flower makes a marvellous fiery contrast against that golden conifer. And over there, the Euphorbia palustris. That's looking good already, and it's going to get bigger and better throughout the season. We're getting there. But every garden needs that extra bit of drama. Plants that I call star performers. The only trouble is that I haven't had this one long enough for plants to have grown and developed into flower. So what we'll do is go over to my own garden at Careby and see how the plants are performing there. Well, I've been developing this garden from scratch for the last 15 years. And although it's got a long way to go, it is at least beginning to mature in places and looking quite nice. But talking of star performers, just have a look at that Crown Imperial. A few weeks ago, that was under the ground. It shot up to more than 3.5 feet in just over as many weeks. You can buy those as dry bulbs and plant them in the autumn, but for a dramatic effect, how could you improve on that? In fact, all spring bulbs are star performers, and at this time of year, it's the tulips that grab the centre of the stage. And here in the white border, I've planned for a succession of bloom. These Purissima tulips, sometimes called White Emperor, are just going over now, but they've been in flower since early March. They're going to be followed on by Spring Green, which is white with an interesting green streak on the outside of the petals. And then bringing up the rear, a late flowering tulip called Pax, which will make sure that I've got colour here right through until about mid-May. Although star performers have to be really dramatic to work well, it's very important that they don't clash or jar with the general colour scheme in the garden. And in this part of mine, I've gone for really bright, warm colours, but they are all coordinated. At the base of this tree, I've got Princess Irene, strong coloured tulip, which makes a lovely contrast with the coppery texture of that trunk. And I've got a bright red anemone here too, which you might think clashes a bit with the orange, but I think the combination's rather jolly. And I put these orange tulips in to match up with some yellow ones, which I planted earlier here, continuing the warm colour theme. And then this year, the latest addition is one called Apricot Beauty. And that, if you look inside, has a lovely warm orange glow. Looking lovely in the spring sunshine is my purple and mauve theme, and I think the old limestone walls really show off the colour of these Negrita tulips. These are actually in their second year here, and tulips always multiply well for me because I plant them at least 8 inches deep. Near the tulips, I've got the wallflower Chelsea Jacket. That's quite a new variety and grows pretty easily from cuttings. In fact, I've got several rooted, and as soon as they're hardened off, I'll be planting one of them in the small garden over at Barnsdale. You know, one of the advantages of living in the same place for any length of time is that you can watch your trees grow up and mature. And when we developed this part of the garden about 8 years ago, I wanted to have a touch of formality about it. So we put in just a straight row of double white cherries. I remember my wife and I planted them on a rotten cold autumn day. They were about 6 foot high then and cost less than £1 a piece. But look at that display now. It's fantastic. Here's another prunus, this time a dwarf one. This has been here for more than 6 years and it's only got that high. It's the Persian almond, Prunus tenella, and to keep it flowering this well, I have to cut it hard back every year after blooming. Now, these are fairly few and far between, difficult to find, but I was very glad to pick one up at my local garden centre, even though it was rather expensive, so I'll be able to have one of these in my new garden at Barnsdale. There's a little bit of frost damage on the flowers of this plant, but nothing serious, and there's nothing whatever wrong with the rest of it. The foliage is nice and green. I must just remember, though, when the buds have finished opening, to cut it hard back And by doing that, it will come up strongly from the base, and that means I'll get a star performance out of this every year. Well, here's a hot little number to go in the border planted with warm, glowing colours. This is a bearded iris called Indian Chief, and that's going to flower at about 3 feet with lovely mahogany flowers, but it'll only be a short burst of colour. And then when they're over, these sword-like leaves will go on, and they'll make a lovely contrast with the rather fussy foliage of that dogwood. Wherever I garden, there are certain plants that I just have to have, and the peony is one of them. I love them. Just look at the beauty of that foliage. And then later on, the flowers come, many of them scented and in lovely colours, pinks and mauves and reds and purples. But apart from all that, peonies have a touch of class, and I'm going to put this one at the edge of my cool colour scheme down here. As well as being dramatic, a lot of star performers have curiosity value too. And in the shady corner, I've planted Dicentra spectabilis. It's a lovely Chinese native, but I like its English name, Lady in the Bath, because if you look at a flower and open it up slightly, you can see that it looks as though there is a lady in the bath here. In fact, what you have there is not a star performer as much as a leading lady.
Oh, why is it that whenever I want to work on the pool, it always pours with rain? So I don't mind, you may as well get wet right the way through. And my water lilies need some attention. They gave me some good flower last year, but if you don't divide them from time to time, then they will go off flower, and now's the time to do it. Right, the first job then is to take it out of the basket and give it a really good wash, so you can see where to cut. Boy, it really does smell this. The bits that you're looking for have got leaves on the top, of course a little crown of growth and roots as well. And then you just cut those off and pot them up into a special lily pot. This is lined with a little bit of sacking and filled up with special compost, or you can use good garden soil and a handful of coarse bone meal. Then cover over the top with some coarse gravel to stop the compost floating out of the container, and it can go back into the water. But some lilies have these big tuberous roots with some little offsets on the sides there. And all you've got to do to propagate these is to actually break off those offsets. They come off very, very easily. And you can see that there's a growth point on the top there. So these are planted vertically into the basket just the same. Then just cover up with gravel in exactly the same way, and this can then be replanted. And you know, there were about 5 or 6 little offsets on there. Each one of those, if you bought from the garden centre, would cost you probably £8 or £10, and you've got enough there to fill your pool and exchange with your friends too. So you see, this sort of gardening can be a lot of fun, and it needn't cost you a fortune either.
What on earth could a beanbag, a piece of drain pipe, some aluminium foil, a black plastic bin liner and a tray have to do with photography? Well, I'll tell you later, and I'll also tell you about the competition Gardens in Focus, which we're launching in association with Gardens World magazine and Pentax cameras. Since photography was invented, gardens have been a natural subject. In the early 1840s, William Fox Talbot took pictures called photogenic drawings, like this leaf. Roger Fenton, photographer of the British Museum, took these shots in 1861. They were heavily criticised at the time for their strong pattern of lines. Photography was the pursuit of the upper and middle classes. It was expensive and time-consuming. Julia Margaret Cameron's photo depicting the goddess of fruitfulness features the model Alice Liddell, who was also the model for Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. This was taken in 1872. The first colour transparency process was introduced in 1907. John Warburg took these pictures around 1910. Again, gardens and people in the garden were a favourite topic. The Royal Commission on the Historic Monuments of England hold a huge collection of historical garden photographs. This photo demonstrates that with the Edwardian trend away from formal gardens, there was also a movement towards rather more naturalistic garden photographs. The garden designer Gertrude Jekyll emphasised the elements of woodland and water and how the house and garden blend into their surroundings. Even now, gardens are a popular subject for photographers. Heather Angel, former president of the Royal Photographic Society, perhaps best known as a wildlife photographer, has had her work published in many gardening books and magazines. She's even given masterclasses on how to take better pictures in the garden. Heather's come here to Van Garden in Surrey, a beautiful informal garden influenced by Gertrude Jekyll, to show me where I'm going wrong with my snaps.
Well, Pippa, I've got 3 golden rules, and that is composition, lighting, and holding the camera steady. But I'll tell you more about those later. What I'd like to do is just run through basics on a few cameras. Now, this is the simplest type of camera possible, no good for close-ups, okay for garden views, just a point-and-shoot thing. But here we have a compact zoom, which is tremendous fun because it actually zooms in and out, so you can crop out anything you don't want and take close-ups as well. But if you're really keen, then you want to go for a single lens reflex, which is what this is, a zoom lens, autofocus, and also a macro mode. So with this, you should take really stunning pictures. There's such a plethora of films available today, it's quite a problem choosing the right one. But if the name ends in chrome, then it's a slide film. If it ends in colour, it's a print film. And the number refers to the sensitivity of film to light. So if it's a low number, 50 or 64, it's much less sensitive than if it's got a high number. And on a dull day, you want to go for something like 200 or 400. When walking along a garden path and you suddenly come to an opening like this, you automatically turn towards it and think, you know, there's a picture worth taking. But sadly, no, it's all path and the interest is on either side. And really, I wouldn't bother to do that. I'd go on and hopefully find something more colourful looking through the pergola. One of the important things when taking views in gardens is to have some interest or colour in the foreground. And this is what I'm going to try and do here. And, oh yeah, that's good. And I like that. You've got colour in the foreground and the pergola's supports give depth to the picture, looking beyond, and a lovely muted lawn. And
That beautiful blossom there right in the centre of the picture, that's really lovely, isn't it?
yes, and it repeats the verticals of the pergola. Excellent. Yeah, I like that. I've seen another shot there where I'm going to take a vertical by turning the camera through 90 degrees.
Right.
Because the plants, the euphorbia and the pergola are asking to be taken this way.
It's not something I would have thought of doing, I must admit, turning it around like that.
No, but I like it. It's going to work well.
Well, have a look at this one. When I took the shot, I thought it's potentially going to be smashing, but I must admit, I'm really disappointed now it's come out.
Well, the idea of using the hole above the gate as a frame is a good one, but sadly, it's not very interesting, and also the horizontals aren't horizontal. I'm going to try a view the other side of the gate, looking back towards the house.
I suppose that'll give you something more interesting the other side,
Well, you've
too.
got colour there for a starter, and I'm not getting the gate in at all. I'm making a very tight crop there.
Yeah.
You see? And that's going to be dark, and then looking through at that lovely door, and of course the fascinating old house.
Everybody loves to have a photo of their garden looking at its very best. But the problem with trying to photograph many small gardens is that you simply can't get far enough away to get a good view. Heather's tip is to go upstairs and look down so that you get a bird's eye view.
Mary, you can't move around quite as much as that. I haven't got much light. Can you just hold it a bit? But keep carrying on. That's lovely. That's great.
Heather, I was watching you taking photos of Mary, and you kept on constantly chatting to her.
So I think that's very important, to get them relaxed and also for them to move into position so the composition is as I want it. Because I think a gardener shouldn't fill the frame. I think they should be part of the garden as a whole, and rather like an animal in its environment. And also, of course, colour harmony is very important. And in fact, I got Mary to put on a blue waistcoat so that it tied in with the blue myosotis in the foreground. I always think water is a magical element in any garden, and here we have the marsh marigolds at the water's edge.
They're looking tremendous. I mean, even now, today, when it's a really grotty day and it's quite dull, there's such a lovely bright splash of colour, aren't they?
That's right. And you can see the reflections of the trees across there. I don't like those. I'm using a polarising filter to get rid of them.
What exactly, how's it going to do that? What's going to happen?
Well, it removes the silvery skylight reflection and makes the surface dark, and also clears the water so you can see the submerged plants more clearly.
Oh, so you could, say, see the roots of the water plant or any fish that might be passing?
Absolutely, yes, it's ideal for that.
Tremendous. Well, Heather, I must admit, I really like reflections in water, and in a lot of the pictures that I took, I purposely tried to include some.
Yes, I noticed that, but the thing about them is that sometimes the eye really doesn't focus on anything particular. You've got all the plants around, and you don't know, you're zooming around. Now, I would actually make a feature of the reflection itself as a nice abstract, filling the frame with it. So it's almost monochromatic, in fact. There's very little colour there, but really rather fun.
OK, so what are you up to now then, Heather?
Oh, I'm using this bin liner to kneel on damp ground, and here I've got a drain pipe with a beanbag on top to help steady the camera.
So a sort of makeshift tripod, really, by the looks of it.
Yes, that's right, and essential for close-ups to try and not move the camera, because you don't, otherwise you'll get a blurred picture.
Right.
And you can have different lengths of drain pipes, you see, different heights.
And what's to the beanbag? I mean, why do you need that on the top?
You can nestle the camera in it and sort of mould it in to get the best possible position.
Oh, you can actually change the angle then, presumably, as well?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yes, it's good. It makes it a lot easier than hand-holding it, you know, because you're swaying backwards and forwards then.
Yep.
Now, Pepper, I noticed when you took a close-up of this, you used flash. Now, it gives very flat frontal lighting, which I'm not too thrilled about.
Yes.
I would do one of several things. Either help boost the light with a reflector. You see, I put cooking foil on a tray here. And notice the difference?
Incredible difference, isn't it?
So that's a useful cheap tip. But then, also, if the sun was shining, I would love to use strong side lighting to make a more three-dimensional picture. And if you're feeling really creative, backlight it so that it really glows coming through. But you've got to be careful with flare coming onto the lens. But if there's hairs or spines in the plant, backlighting can be really exciting. Now, the fun thing about photography is that no two people see pictures in the same way. I've noticed you've gone for a close-up with the japonica. I like the wood pattern behind.
I must admit, that was what attracted me, really, actually.
Now, I've come further back, because the picture I saw was of the rusty old roller, long wedged in the grass there, and this japonica giving colour behind. But sadly, there's a distraction of those ladders there, which will have to be moved.
Yeah, it spoils it a bit.
And the thing about any shot, you've really got to watch for distractions, and sometimes just moving a paste one side to the other can make all the difference. But photography is all about using your eyes, and you just have to keep them open, and you'll see things really everywhere, all around you.
Well, I really hope that Heather's photography tips will inspire you to enter the Gardens in Focus competition we're launching with Pentax and Gardeners World magazine. Your gardening-related photos could win you one of these superb cameras. There are 3 categories in the competition: plants and flowers, gardens and gardeners, and up to 2 entries are allowed in each category. Photos may be either black and white or colour, transparencies or prints, but no glass-mounted slides, please. The panel of judges will include Heather Angel. The competition entry form is in the June issue of the Gardeners World magazine, which should be in the shops right now, and also contains full competition details. The closing date for entries is the 29th of July this year, so you better get out there.
Well, my composting area may not be very photogenic, but it's certainly the secret of beautiful gardens. Now, I've always stressed that the secret of making good compost is to generate a lot of heat within the heap. And this new compost container, I think, is pretty good. Note that it's only got one air hole down here at the bottom because the whole thing rests on bricks with a plastic mesh at the bottom to stop the compost falling through. No holes at all in the side and a plastic lid too on the top, which really does retain the heat. I put this grass cuttings and horse manure compost in only yesterday with a thermometer, and I've already got a temperature there of 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and that really is pretty good. It's going to make some marvellous compost. Now, it comes to you like this, and it's very easy to erect. All you've got to do is to tie it down one side with these strings. And the secret is this. I've just slit the top to show you what's inside this polythene envelope. It's a sheet of hardboard and then a sheet of polystyrene too, and that of course will retain all the heat. The whole thing will cost £38 delivered to your door. Now, when they first brought it to me, they were making it in this colour, and I said I cannot see any discerning gardener wanting to have that in his garden. So very wisely they've changed their colour now to that. And I just wish I could persuade these people to do the same thing, because I think this is a jolly good compost container. This is plastic, and it consists again of a double wall which traps the sun's rays and really creates a lot of heat in there. But the other novel thing is that you sink half of it in the ground, and the bottom bit has got this plastic grill on it. And that means that you won't get any vermin, no rats or mice or anything in there. It's also got a pretty secure lid, and that means that you can put into it all your kitchen waste, including cooked food, which you wouldn't normally put on your compost heap. It costs £50, and bear in mind that if you don't put all this stuff in your dustbin, you're going to save that money on your poll tax bill. This is a common mistake that even experienced gardeners make. Due to early season enthusiasm, I've got miles too many lettuces here, and my small family are never going to eat this lot, so they'll run to seed. Now, the secret of good vegetable growing is to keep a succession going right the way through the season. And that's one of the reasons why I recommend these 4-foot wide beds, because the first rule is to sow in short rows. Now, I've got a whole load of crops here that are at or nearing maturity, things like spinach and turnips and beetroot and cabbage, and then exactly the same set of crops down here that were sown later and are much smaller. Most successional crops want to be sown between a fortnight and a month intervals, and I sowed some cabbage about a month ago, and so I'm now due to sow some more. But do bear in mind that when you sow, you only need just a pinch of seed like that, because most of these are going to come up. And when they do, you can then thin them to 9 inches apart and use the transplants to make another row or two. And of course, those transplants will mature a couple of weeks later than the ones that you've left in. It's also time now to sow those exotic vegetables like the runner beans and courgettes, but of course they only need to be sown once. Give them the protection of a cut-off plastic bottle or a jam jar, and that'll really warm up the soil and get them going, and they'll be away in no time. These don't look bad, do they? And the tomatoes are coming on nicely too. Though I must admit that Anne is beginning to compete in her greenhouse. I shall have to keep an eye on her. And tomatoes are one of the things that she'll be covering next week. Meanwhile, Nigel and Pippa are off to the Morven show. Now, that really is the Chelsea of the West Midlands, so there'll be some good things to see there. And Stefan is investigating the intriguing story of the old florist tulips, while I'll be back here at Barnsdale, of course, reminding you of what you should be doing to keep your garden beautiful. Goodbye.